I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
A heavy silence has settled over the British monarchy, signaling the definitive end of an era of tentative hope. Prince Harry believed that one last, entirely private appeal could finally reopen the heavy doors he had spent years watching close against him. He envisioned a quiet room far from the public glare, a sanctuary where family bonds could be salvaged before the separation turned into a permanent multi-generational wound. Instead, his desperate request reached Prince William at the worst possible moment, when the weight of the crown's future and personal exhaustion had left no room for vulnerability. The answer from the Prince of Wales came swiftly, without hesitation, and with a cold finality that shattered any remaining illusions. William completely overruled his younger brother's plea for a formal reconciliation meeting, refusing to allow the palace machinery to be put in motion for another round of volatile emotional negotiations. To ensure there was no ambiguity, Princess delivered an even sharper confirmation from within the inner circle, clarifying that the royal family's organized attempts to repair this broken relationship were not merely delayed or temporarily paused, but officially dead. Harry was forced to absorb his crushing verdict completely alone, thousands of miles away, realizing that his ultimate gamble for peace had dissolved into total exclusion. The appeal itself had been crafted as a final, pure act of hope, a document stripped of the usual legalistic armor and public relations strategies that had defined their conflict for years. Harry had explicitly asked for a strictly confidential summit involving only himself, King Charles, Prince William, and Princess, and offering to return to British soil without a retinue of advisors, without cameras, without prearranged press statements, and without any institutional demands. For the Duke of Sussex, this was no longer a chess match about royal status, security funding, or public apologies, but a raw, human plea to remain a functional son to a recovering father, a brother to a distant heir, and a father whose children, Archie and Lilibet, might otherwise inherit a lifetime of estrangement. When the document arrived at the palace, William read the final page twice, his eyes scanning the lines that sought to bypass years of bitter public warfare. The future king did not look victorious or vindicated as he held the paper. Instead, an immense wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over him. Years of broken promises, unauthorized media leaks, deep-seated anger and profound disappointment had taught the Prince of Wales that a single emotional meeting would not heal the scars, but would likely rip them wide open, exposing his family to fresh vulnerability. When palace officials quietly asked for his explicit instruction on how to process the Duke's letter, William answered clearly and firmly that no meeting would be arranged and no formal reconciliation process would be initiated under any circumstances. Princess reviewed the request through a highly secured, documented private palace account specifically prepared for the senior members of the family. The Princess Royal, legendary for her unyielding dedication to duty and institutional stability, firmly agreed with the heir's assessment that genuine reconciliation cannot survive in an environment completely devoid of basic trust. She flatly refused to endorse another high-stakes family negotiation that could easily be weaponized or leaked to fuel yet another round of damaging public spectacle. Just minutes after William issued his veto, and solidified the stance by confirming that the family-led effort to bridge the chasm was permanently finished, Harry received a definitive answer during a brief, tense telephone call across the Atlantic. The Duke initially believed that the stark, unyielding wording of the refusal must have been misunderstood or distorted by palace intermediaries. He quietly asked for the statement to be repeated word for word, and when the exact cold phrases were read back to him, he fell into absolute silence. The rejection cut deeper than any previous public slight, because the specific plea was never solely about his own validation or standing. Archie and Lilibet stood invisibly behind every single word their father had written, driven by profound fear that an ongoing parental silence would eventually turn a temporary geographical distance into a permanent, bitter inheritance for the next generation. Yet, there was one deeply personal detail within the appeal that had remained hidden from the broader palace staff. Harry had attached a separate, handwritten note intended exclusively for William's eyes, bypassing the formal tone of the main document. This private note directly referenced their late mother, Princess Diana, recalling vivid memories of their shared childhood and a sacred promise the two brothers had once made never to abandon one another, no matter how chaotic their lives became. William read those handwritten lines as well, but even the powerful ghost of their shared past could not bend his resolve. His refusal had not been born out of sudden malice in that quiet room. Rather, it was a result of a recent hidden betrayal that had fully convinced him that entering another private room with his brother was simply too dangerous. To truly comprehend why William could reject his younger brother so completely, the immense emotional cost carried by all four key royals must first be laid bare. Behind the polished, stoic language of palace press releases were four distinct individuals caring for radically different versions of the very same family tragedy. Where Harry saw an act of cruel, institutional rejection, William saw an imminent danger to the safety and privacy of his immediate household. Where Princess saw a vital constitutional duty being dangerously tested by volatile family emotions, King Charles saw his two only sons moving completely beyond his patriarchal reach. The decision to close the door was executed through institutional channels, but the underlying pain was deeply personal, leaving everyone involved with something profound to lose. The truth is, the Grand Reconciliation Project had catastrophically failed long before Princess, and ever gave that failure its official name. The deepest fear driving Harry was the thought of his children growing up completely disconnected from their heritage, knowing their royal aunts, uncles, and cousins only through glossy magazine photographs, sensationalized news headlines, and historical narratives of a bitter feud they had no part in causing. His urgent appeal was a desperate attempt to shield Archie and Lilibet from inheriting his own painful exile, but the harder he pushed against the palace gates, the more William became convinced that immense, unfair pressure was being placed on the very family he had sworn his life to protect. William carried a unique, monumental burden that his younger brother could no longer fully accept or accommodate. As the Prince of Wales, he is a direct heir to the ancient British throne, meaning that his private choices, his boundaries, and his personal relationships directly shape the ultimate survival and moral authority of the crown itself. He was not evaluating Harry's letter simply as a deeply wounded brother who had been publicly criticized in memoirs and interviews. He was judging it strictly as the future king who was fundamentally responsible for protecting Catherine during her health journey, safeguarding his three young children, and defending an institution already severely weakened by years of relentless internal warfare. Meanwhile, King Charles sat entirely alone with Harry's letter remaining unopened on his desk for several agonizing minutes. The aging monarch desperately wanted to hear his younger son's voice, to find a way to heal the fracturing of his family before his own reign drew closer to its inevitable conclusion. But he also knew that forcing William into an unwanted, high-stress meeting could permanently tear the two brothers apart. The king actually reached for his private telephone, fully intended to intervene and perhaps soften the blow, but before the call could even connect, the monarch slowly lowered the receiver and ended it. He realized that overruling his direct heir might briefly reopen a channel of communication with Harry, but it would simultaneously destroy the fragile, crucial trust remaining between himself and the son who must one day succeed him. When Princess finally confirmed that the reconciliation effort was officially dead, she felt absolutely no sense of victory or triumph. The Princess Royal slowly removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and sat in absolute silence within her private office, fully aware of the gravity of what had just transpired. That historic title identifies the most senior female royal position, one traditionally granted to the monarch's eldest daughter, a role she had used to protect the crown through decades of turbulent change. She had personally watched both William and Harry grow from two intensely grieving young boys walking behind their mother's coffin into two deeply divided men, and she understood with absolute clarity exactly which doors her final confirmation had locked forever. Harry's handwritten note, rather than softening the situation, had actually made William's final decision much harder to execute but firmer in its resolve. In those private lines, Harry had extended a partial olive branch, admitting that immense anger and frustration had heavily shaped past actions that he could no longer fully defend or justify. However, the apology stopped just short of taking full, unconditional responsibility for the systemic damage done to the family's global reputation. William read those emotional lines not as a sign of complete, transformative remorse, but as a conditional regret that sought a quick path back without addressing the core breaches of privacy. The future king felt personally targeted by the letter because it effectively placed the entire moral burden of repairing the broken family dynamics squarely upon his shoulders, completely ignoring profound violations that had made basic trust feel entirely dangerous to maintain. These four royals were no longer just separated by a single explosive argument or geographical divide. Instead, a relentless cycle of repeated disappointments and public disclosures had hardened every single position, transforming a family bond into a cold constitutional standoff. The deep emotional wounds that had accumulated over the years within the House of Windsor certainly went a very long way in explaining the immense, suffocating pain felt by everyone involved. But the ultimate catalyst behind the complete collapse of this recent reconciliation attempt actually lay buried within a highly classified, invisible chain of hidden events. Months before Prince Harry's final, desperate plea ever made its way across the ocean to the polished desks of Buckingham Palace, a remarkably quiet, intensely protected, and deeply secretive effort had already been carefully orchestrated behind the scenes to bring the two deeply estranged brothers back into the same room. It was an operation conducted with the absolute highest level of institutional discretion, deliberately shielded from the prying eyes of the global media, carefully insulated from public scrutiny, and hidden even from the vast majority of the palace's own internal staff. No grand official announcements had been drafted by the press office. No royal photographers had been briefed to capture a historic family reunion, and no hints had been dropped to royal commentators. However, a single, devastating conversation that occurred during this highly experimental private process changed the trajectory of their relationship forever, solidifying boundaries that had previously been fluid. William had initially entered the secret process with a cautious but genuine glimmer of hope, harboring a faint belief that beneath the layers of public grievances and deeply painful memoirs, a foundation of mutual trust might still be painstakingly rebuilt over time. Yet, he walked away from that fateful night, entirely convinced that even the most deeply personal, vulnerable, and private exchanges would inevitably be transformed into a public weapon against his immediate family. From that dark evening forward, the concept of royal reconciliation was no longer viewed within the palace walls as a noble, desirable hope, but was officially reclassified as an unacceptable institutional risk that threatened the stability of the crown. The initial meeting had been masterfully arranged by Princess and herself, who deliberately chose a completely neutral, heavily guarded private residence located well outside the chaotic confines of central London to serve as the setting for this high-stakes family experiment. She had explicitly chosen an informal dinner setting rather than a stiff royal drawing room because she knew with absolute certainty that decades of rigid palace formality, structured protocols, and artificial pleasantries had completely failed the brothers in the past, driving them further apart. The Princess Royal, a historic title traditionally bestowed upon the monarch's oldest daughter to signify her lifetime of unyielding service and unique institutional authority, passionately wanted Harry and William to look each other in the eyes and speak freely, entirely stripped of protective advisors, prepared legal statements, or media staff controlling every single word that crossed their lips. Both brothers had entered the residence having signed a strict, verbal pact that absolutely nothing said inside the walls of that room would ever travel beyond it, agreeing that this was their one true sanctuary to speak as raw individuals. Harry arrived at the dinner deeply believing that this informal setting could finally restore a viable, long-term path back toward a normal family life, allowing him to bridge the vast ocean that separated his old world from his new existence. He looked directly at his older brother and stated with immense emotion that Archie and Lilibet could not possibly remain distant strangers forever, isolated from their own flesh and blood. The Duke of Sussex passionately argued that his young children deserved to be brought much closer to the vibrant center of the family, clarified he was not seeking grand royal titles, official patronages, or taxpayer-funded security duties for them, but was simply pleading for a basic, enduring personal contact with their relatives. William listened to his younger brother's emotional presentation with profound intensity, remaining completely silent for several long minutes before delivering an unyielding answer that introduced a single, non-negotiable condition. The Prince of Wales looked across the table and firmly stated that trust had to come before access, a powerful phrase that instantly shifted the entire dynamic of the room. That specific sentence changed everything between the two men, because it effectively transformed a brotherly plea for familial love into a strict institutional evaluation. Tragically, a mere matter of days after that secret dinner had concluded, the exact phrase "trust must come before access" mysteriously appeared word for word inside a highly sensitive, confidential internal briefing that was actively being circulated among Harry's closest circle of professional advisors. A private briefing within the royal context is an extremely restricted internal summary, shared exclusively with a microscopic group of trusted individuals to carefully guide future public responses, legal strategies, or media positioning. No official palace statement had ever been authorized regarding the dinner. No staff members have been allowed to sit inside the dining room. And no recording devices have been present, yet William's exact, uniquely phrased words had somehow escaped that secure room and crossed the Atlantic. When the leak was confirmed by palace security teams, William immediately confronted Harry directly by telephone, his voice cold with an immense sense of validation and disappointment. The future king demanded to know exactly how a highly specific sentence, spoken in total privacy, without a single witness present, had managed to travel beyond the walls of that house within 48 hours. Harry vehemently denied ever authorizing any such disclosure to his team, maintaining his absolute innocence and insisting with great passion that he had not broken their sacred verbal agreement. But for the Prince of Wales, the explanation mattered far less than the undeniable reality. He heard only another convoluted excuse, another profound breach of basic family privacy, and another example of private vulnerability turning into imminent public danger. As the phone call progressed, Harry's frustration and anger rose rapidly, shouting that he could not possibly be held personally responsible for every single piece of gossip or strategic conversation that occurred around him in his complex new life. The Duke then accused William of deliberately using excessive suspicion as a convenient, cruel excuse to completely avoid the hard work of forgiveness. That sharp accusation hardened the future king's stance immediately and permanently, turning a temporary pause into a concrete wall. What Harry saw as an unfair, overly harsh institutional judgment, the Prince of Wales saw as absolute, undeniable proof that personal responsibility would always be pushed elsewhere, and that true privacy could never be guaranteed. Princess had explicitly warned both brothers before the dinner took place that a single breach of confidentiality from either side would instantly and permanently end her willingness to mediate between them. True to her legendary reputation for uncompromising discipline, the moment she confirmed that the sensitive phrase had circulated among advisors, she contacted both men through separate, strictly recorded palace telephone lines and demanded a comprehensive, transparent explanation. When neither brother could provide a justification that satisfied her rigorous institutional standards, the trusted mediator instantly realized that this delicate family experiment had completely failed, and the bridge was broken. King Charles learned the full, devastating truth of the failed dinner later through a highly detailed, documented private palace account prepared by senior security officials. The aging monarch finally understood with absolute clarity why William completely refused to trust private verbal assurances ever again, even when Harry sounded entirely sincere and desperate on the phone. It was at that moment that William formally returned Princess Anne's handwritten seating plan from that ill-fated dinner, folding the paper once, placing it firmly on the desk before her, and stating with absolute finality that there would never be a second attempt under those conditions. The earlier betrayal had successfully created profound institutional fear, but only a direct, unvarnished face-to-face confrontation between the two brothers would ultimately reveal whether any true emotional bond still remained buried beneath the layers of accumulated anger. Although Prince William's written refusal should have technically put an absolute end to the entire heartbreaking matter, Prince Harry resolutely refused to let the heavy iron gates of the palace close on him without one final stand. Operating through a highly trusted, deeply discreet private intermediary who still held access to both worlds, the Duke of Sussex managed to secure a brief, unchoreographed encounter with his older brother before the palace apparatus could formally and legally finalize the rejection. There were no television cameras present, no senior royal aides taking notes, and no carefully prepared public speeches to soften the blow. Only two brothers facing the smoking ruins of a family relationship that the entire world had once considered completely unbreakable. Harry came into that quiet room fully prepared to plead for his children's future, while William came rigidly prepared to defend his family's boundaries, and neither of them was truly ready for how rapidly the ghosts of their shared past would flood the small space. Harry arrived at a secure, private royal property outside London after learning that William would be present there for a highly critical, scheduled internal briefing. Princess Anne, acting on her final instincts as a relative, allowed exactly 10 minutes for the interaction, deeply believing that a direct, unvarnished face-to-face exchange might prevent fresh, Public media claims that the younger prince had been completely denied the human right to speak to his family. A royal briefing within this high-stakes context is a highly secure, private meeting where senior working family members receive sensitive intelligence and make monumental decisions before any information reaches the global public, and firmly dismiss the remaining aides, closed a heavy adjoining oak door, and left the two brothers entirely alone without their respective legal teams, prepared notes, or protective palace language to shield them from their own raw emotions. Harry spoke first, his voice trembling but determined, as the Duke urgently asked William to approve just one single, controlled family meeting involving King Charles and all the grandchildren together. He promised absolute silence. He explicitly accepted that no royal duties or funding were being restored, and he made it clear that all he wanted was a small, personal path back to human contact before the geographical and emotional distance became a permanent scar. William did not soften his expression for even a second, stating firmly that the ongoing conflict was no longer about geography, royal titles, or traditional court protocol. Protocol, in the strict reality of the British monarchy, means the formal, ancient rules that control all royal conduct, institutional access, and public presentation. The real, underlying issue, William insisted, was the total death of basic trust, pointing out that every single attempt to repair their relationship over the past years had invariably ended with private family pain being transformed into lucrative public material, whether done deliberately by Harry or through the volatile people surrounding him. Harry placed a tense hand on the back of a wooden chair, looking directly into his brother's eyes and loudly reminding William of the sacred, solemn promise they had made to each other after their mother Princess Diana's tragic death, a vow that neither brother would ever allow the other to stand completely alone against the world. The powerful words struck incredibly hard, causing the future king's facial expression to change instantly, but his final answer remained completely unchanged. William then admitted that he had read the private, handwritten childhood note repeatedly in his study, and that he fully understood the deep apology hidden inside it, as well as the immense grief attached to the words. However, the prince firmly stated that regret, without visibly changed behavior, could never rebuild a safe environment for his own household. Harry heard this as a cold, institutional punishment, while his older brother viewed it as a necessary act of survival for Crown. Princess returned to the room the exact moment their voices began to rise dangerously, and Harry immediately turned toward his aunt, fully expecting her to offer him some form of maternal support. The Princess Royal, however, flatly refused to offer any comfort, and through a private conversation witnessed exclusively by the three of them, she declared that the monarchy could not continuously reopen a painful process that severely damaged everyone involved each time it inevitably failed. She made it clear that her role as a trusted family mediator was officially over, and when Harry quietly asked whether the decision was permanent, William answered without even raising his voice, stating simply that the process was finished, and opened the door, and the Duke remained completely still for several heavy seconds before walking out into the cold rain, realizing that his ultimate appeal had failed because of William's immense, growing authority inside a monarchy that was already actively preparing for its future succession. The painful confrontation exposed their deep wounds. But the true force behind the final veto came from the stark reality that Harry had appealed to a brother, but had received the unyielding answer of a future king. William's refusal carried total institutional weight, because the structural machinery of the British monarchy had already begun shifting immense responsibility toward him. King Charles remained the reigning sovereign, yet all critical decisions involving long-term family access, institutional protection, and the boundaries of the next generation were increasingly passing through the office of the Prince of Wales. Harry saw this reality as an abuse of personal power used directly against him, but Princess saw something radically different, an heir fiercely defending the stability of the throne he would one day inherit, even when that defense demanded an unbearable personal sacrifice. Charles actually read the final recommendation prepared after Harry's request, and placed the document directly beside an old, colored family photograph on his desk. A royal recommendation is a highly formal, private institutional assessment used explicitly to guide the sovereign's final legal decisions. The king looked at the old photograph significantly longer than the security briefing, feeling the immense weight of a father who wanted his younger son brought back into the fold, balanced against his duties as a monarch who could not ignore the catastrophic damage another public failure would cause. Charles briefly considered using his sovereign power to approve a limited, private meeting without William's support, but Princess and stopped him immediately, warning through a documented private consultation that overruling the direct heir would fatally divide the family's command structure. William then made an unexpected, monumental offer to his father, stating that the palace could place the entire public blame of the refusal squarely on his shoulders, as he was fully prepared to carry the public anger, so that Charles would not be remembered by history as the father who abandoned his son. Anne's final, decisive judgment proved to be the ultimate turning point, as she stated that further mediation would always fail because the two brothers fundamentally wanted entirely different things. Harry saw emotional entry before trust was restored, while William demanded proven trust before any door was unlocked. The protective boundary around Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis became absolute, ensuring they would not be drawn into an unresolved conflict between adults. King Charles picked up his pen, hesitated for a long moment, and finally signed the document supporting William's veto, ordering that Harry be informed privately, with absolute dignity, and without any suggestion that he was no longer loved as a son. By the following morning, the private rejection had inevitably escaped into the public view, transforming a deeply personal family tragedy into an international spectacle. News of the final refusal spread like wildfire across global television networks, radio stations, front pages, and social media platforms. But the central fact remained brutally simple. Harry had asked for a final peace summit. William had blocked it, and Princess had confirmed the family process was dead. Buckingham Palace offered absolutely no emotional defense or elaborate statements, choosing a path of complete restraint that suggested the decision was definitive and would never be overturned by headlines or public sympathy. A small crowd gathered outside the historic palace gates, where one woman left flowers beneath a note that read "Protect the Future," while minutes later a young man left a message stating brothers should not become strangers. A major morning newspaper sharpened the division further, displaying a front page that showed William arriving for a formal engagement next to an image of Harry standing entirely alone, dominated by 3 words: the final no. In accepting this heartbreaking ending, every single member of the family revealed what mattered most when love, loyalty, duty, and self-protection could no longer exist in the same space. The door did not close with explosive anger, revenge, or celebration. It closed with a quiet, heavy recognition that the crown could only move forward into the future after the family completely stopped pretending that the past could still be undone.
It closed with the quiet recognition that the crown could move forward only after the family stopped pretending the past could still be undone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.